I have learned after 22 years of being a rabbi that, especially on Yom Kippur, everybody wants you to say everything just the way they wish you would say it. Take a moment and think about what you're hoping I will say today. I can't promise you, but I am pretty sure that I've said something like that this year. And if I haven't, another person in the leadership of B'nai Keshet has. And if you have come every Shabbat and know that I am wrong, I would like to invite you to do a Devar Torah. So there's been a New Year's greeting that I don't remember hearing before, but that has been one I've heard a lot this year. It dates from a poem in the 13th century. And the greeting goes like this. Tichle hashana v'kiloteha, tachel shana uvirchoteha. May the past year and its curses end. May this coming year and its blessings begin. I said on Rosh Hashanah, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it again. This has been a very hard year to be Jewish. For many of us, the degree to which anti-Semitism has expressed itself in places that feel close to home has been especially hard. I'm mostly going to talk about that today. I know there are other things I could say. But this year we faced anti-Semitic sentiments in places that we are comfortable in, typically. In circles where we are used to feeling in agreement with folks. Maybe we're in agreement with them because we have similar opinions about racial justice or about abortion rights. But this year you have told me about moments where your children on college campuses chose not to share that they had been to Israel in the past summer, where they had an experience of somebody spitting the word Zionist at them, saying it as an insult. I have sat and I have listened to frustrations that you have shared with me about efforts in your offices to just have some kind of statement that whatever else is saying also affirms the losses of October 7th. You've told me about statements from organizations that you embrace that you have felt like have not embraced you. Statements that have villainized the entire Jewish population of Israel, that have imagined a future without those Jews. I am so grateful to have been born when I was born. We have all lived through one of the safest eras probably ever in Jewish history. A time when it was possible to imagine that the cyclical nature of anti-Semitism was actually coming to an end, that there might not be another cycle. So it's been really hard. It's been particularly hard. It's been a blow to see this unnatural human-created cycle firing up again, to see anti-Semitism revving up, and to see it in places where we are used to feeling safe. Anti-Semitic bias and stereotypes, they're just deeply, deeply woven into Christian and Western culture. So deeply that they're not always recognized, especially during times of relative Jewish freedom. They stay there below the surface. And until they are dismantled for good, may that day come soon, they can be unearthed and they can be used as tools by those who are seeking to misdirect, to scapegoat. And these are biases and stories that have ancient roots. They're expressions of Christian insecurity that's directed at Jews. They are also expressions of Christian supremacy and desire for power. The Christian hatred of Jews casts Jews as the ultimate caricature of evil, as Christ killers, as people using blood of Christian children in their rituals, as actually having horns on our heads like devils. But even after the Enlightenment, when the religiosity of society started to drop, pseudoscientific, racialized versions of Jew hatred were constructed to fill the gaps left by waning authority of religion. There was no idea really in any meaningful way of a Semitic people. It wasn't used to describe Jews until it was racialized to justify theories of anti-Semitism. The Protocols of Zion, forged by czars, deepened the conspiratorial aspects of anti-Semitism, allowing forever updating imaginations of world Jewish control, naming Jews both as ultra-capitalists, as scheming communists. And later these conspiracies imagined Jews as puppeteers behind every social movement you can imagine, masters of the media. And all of these tropes, all of these precedents, they're present in the anti-Semitism of today. It is useful to think of these historical expressions of anti-Semitism as engines. Because when we think about anti-Semitism as an engine or a machine, we can ask, who made this machine? Who is this engine serving? How are people who are not even served by anti-Semitism, maybe even they oppose it, nonetheless saying or doing things that fuel it? So the machinery of Christian Jew hatred, fueled by accusations of blood libel and Christ killing, served to build Christian power, served as a justification for forced conversion. The anti-Semitism that followed cast Jews as greedy moneylenders, and it served the nobility. It was fueled by popular Jew hatred, but it harmed the very peasants who took up arms for pogroms. Anti-Semitism has been around for a long time, and it has served many purposes, and we might do better to talk about anti-Semitisms, plural. Recently, there have been arguments in the Jewish community, but not only in the Jewish community, in Congress and state houses, about how to define anti-Semitism as it manifests today. And these new definitions arose as a response to repeated spikes in European anti-Semitism over the last 20 years that have directly correlated with escalations in Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we are now seeing these spikes here in the US as well. So here's the thing. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about right-wing anti-Semitism today. Spotting a Nazi, spotting a white supremacist, that's pretty easy. All of these new debated definitions are followed by lists of examples because it's actually not very easy to explain when criticism of Israel or criticism of Zionism is legitimate and when, on the other hand, it has crossed a line into anti-Semitism. So just to give you one example from one of these documents. It says, it is anti-Semitic to treat Israel differently solely because it is a Jewish state using standards different than those applied to other countries. That seems simple. But then it says, paying disproportionate attention to Israel and treating Israel differently than other countries is not always, on its face, by itself, proof of anti-Semitism. It's complicated. You might not choose that definition, but all of these definitions are trying to get these subtleties clear. Because anti-Semitism is present in criticism of Israel. And agreeing on how and when and why, it is not easy. So just let me, before I go on, even though I'm mostly talking about anti-Semitism today, let me pause to say something with as much clarity as I possibly can say. It is legitimate to criticize Israel. And Jewish legacy organizations that define critiques of Israel too broadly as anti-Semitic, they actually have the effect of casting aspersions on Israelis who are arguing for their own democracy, on Israelis who are arguing for the release of hostages. And overly broad generalizations about anti-Semitism in relationship to Israel, they provide cover for those who deny all claims of anti-Semitism in relation to Israel. Here at B'nai Keshet, we have a wide breadth of political opinions, but I don't know of anybody, I know of no one who has no critiques of Israel, including our strongest defenders of Israel. Just as it is an act of love to intervene with a friend or a family member who is abusing alcohol, it is sometimes an expression of loyalty and love for Jews to critique the policies of their fellow Jews in Israel. But our genuine love for Israel, our concern for its safety, our hope for its future peace, expressed through caring critique, this is something very different from the way anti-Semitism has been mapped onto Israel since its inception. The former Soviet Union used Israel to create fracture in the West. Arab and Muslim leaders have manipulated genuine support for the plight of Palestinians and stoked it with anti-Semitic rhetoric to misdirect anger that is a threat to their authoritarian power. In Europe, the cry of Zionism as racism distorted the insidious history of racism, which was born of European colonialism and constructed to justify profit from African slave trade. Casting Israel as the premier example of colonialism buries the sinister foundations of Western power and wealth. It allows Western countries to avoid accountability for the ongoing legacy of colonialism in the global South. And I would say further that disproportionate focus on Israel has the effect of taking steam out of efforts that are closer to home, efforts to right our wrongs, whether it be through foreign aid or reparations, efforts that would require sacrifice and contrition for harms done here and for harms that are still being done here. Historical Zionism was a political movement to build a sovereign state. It succeeded. At the beginning of the last century, though, we should just note, Jews around the world were debating all kinds of ideas, all kinds of theories of Jewish liberation. Those debates, they were transformed by the Holocaust. The majority of the proponents who were arguing for creating Jewish safety in Europe, in the diaspora, those proponents died. Since the founding of Israel, there have been many subsequent Zionisms. With all those Zionisms, I want to say that I am not going to let my Zionism be defined by those who are farthest to the right in Israel. I believe in good faith. I believe that people of good faith can argue about what Zionism should mean. It's just a fact that there have been Israeli non-Zionists and Israeli anti-Zionists for just decades. I believe we should respect Jews who ask hard questions about Zionism, hard questions about Israel, and even if they argue that this is an ideology beyond repair, we can tolerate that. But if I am attacked as a Zionist, I am going to defend myself as a Zionist. I will cast my lot with the likes of Vivian Silver, the peace activist who was murdered on October 7th and who described her own Zionism saying, her commitment to the national liberation of Jews required the national liberation of Palestinians as well. Now, I realize that might not be your definition, and I'm so proud that we have many competing definitions in this very room. But we cannot let those who use Zionist as a slur define our Zionisms. This is an emotional topic for me. Maybe it's an emotional topic for you. Maybe you're feeling some emotions right now. You might just notice if that's true. You could take a breath. The thing is, listening to stories of anti-Semitic incidents, seeing anti-Semitic posts online, hearing colleagues or friends make statements that suggest anti-Semitic bias, whether conscious or unconscious, it can give rise to very intense and big emotions. Anger and fear and betrayal and loss, sadness, confusion. Sometimes even worse than the feelings that arise when we witness anti-Semitism is how we feel when another Jew argues that the very incident that we find so disturbing, they don't actually see it as anti-Semitism. It's normal. It's just normal for emotions related to anti-Semitism to ring louder for us. There is such strong evidence that we have inherited both genetic and historical trauma, cultural anti-Semitic trauma. The Holocaust is so part of our lived communal memory. I remember I had nobody in my family who died of the Holocaust, thank God. But I remember as a kid having dreams about Nazis, nightmares. And I know that I'm not alone. Just try to imagine for a moment that there had been no Holocaust. We would still carry the pain of anti-Semitism in our bones. But there was a Holocaust. So it really should not come as any kind of a surprise that we are wired to take anti-Semitism seriously. We need to be kind. We need to be compassionate with ourselves when anxiety about anti-Semitism arises, when it gives rise to strong emotions, including the urge to get the heck out of here, to fight like hell, or if we just feel stuck and frozen. And really, I don't blame them, but through no fault of their own, many of our non-Jewish friends, they are oblivious to this dynamic. And we need to teach them about it. Because Jews have been targeted so often in so many places, repeatedly in our history, with so many different types of Jew hatred, that it's insensitive for a non-Jew to tell us we are overreacting. So one time in 6th grade, I lived in Fresno, California. There are not nearly the number of Jews there that there are here. I was walking home, and two of my friends from my class started goofing around doing Sig Heils. And it was really disturbing to me. I didn't do anything. I didn't know what to do. They were goofing around. They were laughing about it. And I later told my dad about it. And he said without hesitation, if that ever happens to you again, punch the first kid who does it as hard as you can. So luckily it did not happen again. And that is not characteristic of my dad. And I do not embrace that advice. But it is often true, it is often the case that a strong reaction is better than no reaction at all. We may not always understand why a certain moment feels anti-Semitic. And a less coherent, confused, even alarmed response may be the first step toward a more thoughtful examination of an anti-Semitic dynamic. We need to be kind with ourselves when these big feelings arise. And we have to also learn to recognize when we are being triggered by historical memory. Our feelings of discomfort, of anxiety, fear, they are one gauge of anti-Semitism, but they're not always the very best gauge. If we carry inherited trauma, or if maybe we have trauma from our own experiences of anti-Semitism, we should expect that sometimes we will have emotional responses that do not directly correlate with the level of threat that we are facing in the moment. A simple thing we can do is to practice how we want to respond if something comes up, so that instead of freezing or blowing up, we can confront anti-Semitism with mindfulness and with care. And I think this is especially important for us to take into account with our allies. Because we are a tiny people. We are 0.2% of the world's population. Our safety, our freedom, our right to thrive is dependent on building a world where human rights and liberties flower and flourish everywhere. It is not only unrealistic to imagine that we can depend only on Jews, but it's lonely, it's alienating, it's exhausting, it's frightening, and thank God it isn't required. We actually have allies that we can count on. And even when we need to rebuild trust with some of them, we can do that rebuilding. And we will find new allies. And we will do this because we need them and because they need us. So, a story from the Talmud. Rabbi Meir lived in a neighborhood where there were criminals who were constantly harassing him and abusing him. And Rabbi Meir used to pray that they would die. Bruria, his wife, challenged him. What are you doing? Do you think you can pray for them to die because it is written sins will cease? It doesn't say sinners, it says sins. Do you believe that if you pray for sinners to cease, there will no longer be evildoers? Rather, pray that they should repent and no longer be evildoers. In the Talmud, Rabbi Meir listened to his wise wife, Bruria. He prayed for them, and they repented. I spent more time this year than ever before in my life, and certainly ever in my career, trying to explain anti-Semitism to interfaith clergy. Trying to help them understand how their statements, understandably in solidarity with Palestinian suffering, too often bumped into expressions of anti-Semitism that they had not done the work to understand. Sometimes this work was very, very simple, like explaining to them that they could express compassion for the victims of October 7th, or that they could show support for the local Jewish community mourning these losses separate from their analysis of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this work has been paying off. These colleagues have found ways to show up. Many this year reached out to me on October 7th. And some are starting to help shoulder the load of fighting anti-Semitism. Let me just note that with my Muslim colleagues, this has been much harder because they are in pain, and they are experiencing loss, and they are experiencing fear. My friend Imam Katanani has lost 17 family members in Gaza in one day. And his mosque, which has a large Palestinian population, almost every week mourns the loss of somebody else who's connected to that part of the world. Here, the work has been just trying to keep the door open. I feel grateful that he returns my phone calls. But so much anti-Semitism is rooted in the history of Christian-Jew hatred and is still, to this day, expressed through forms of Christian supremacy. I believe our Christian friends have a special and important role to play in dismantling this legacy. Some of you have heard that this summer, after years of planning and attempts, we secured funding for a pilot project of bringing together Jews and African American Christians to study anti-Semitism and racism together. This was a collaborative process facilitated by an African American Catholic, a white Jewish rabbi, and it was rooted in our shared self-interest in fighting white Christian nationalism, our shared skin in the game. So there were 5 sessions, and they became increasingly difficult, increasingly challenging. One scenario that I found especially enlightening required us to imagine ourselves in an interfaith group that was just about to celebrate victory for having secured affordable housing. And at the very last moment, we find out that one of our partners, in fact, the honoree for the event, had long ago made numerous Facebook posts about the nefariousness of Jewish slumlords. So we Christian and Jewish and white and black participants who participated in responding to this scenario, which you can believe something like that has happened, all the things that might be said were said. For instance, if this was an awful landlord and he was Jewish, perhaps the posts are just describing the facts. And you can be sure that some other people pointed out the Jewishness of the landlord was irrelevant. The moment Jewish gets added as a specific modifier to slumlord, it is an expression of anti-Semitism. But after a while, the conversation got less predictable. Someone suggested that naming the landlord as Jewish might be understood within the community where that was happening as a signifier of somebody who was an outsider. And finally, our facilitator asked us to consider the possibility that naming the landlord as Jewish might be an expression of relationship, of connection. That despite all the ups and downs of white Jewish racism and expressions of anti-Semitism in Christian African American communities, that there remains a strong memory in both communities of solidarity, of support in the face of shared prejudice. That sometimes naming the wrongdoer as Jewish might be an expression of hurt and loss of a relationship that was believed to be strong. This was something I had not thought of before. And before this, I had thought that the sometimes disproportionate focus by white Jews on expressions of anti-Semitism in Christian and Muslim African American communities, I have thought that the only lens that made sense to me for viewing that disproportionate reaction was that this was the result of our own racism. And you know what? I still think that that is often true. But a kinder possibility is also sometimes true, which is that we too feel a sense of lost relationship and hurt. That our history of fighting justice together creates higher expectations of mutual support. Sometimes our larger reactions to anti-Semitism among perceived allies are an expression of how much those relationships mean to us and how much we need each other. I'm glad to say that everyone who participated in these 5 sessions, they wanted more. Our friends from Bethany Baptist, our funders from the Federation, and I'm also glad to say that this model is going to expand. So, this past year we have been hurting, we've been in shock, we've been afraid. But in this coming year, we and groups like ours are going to roll up our sleeves and we are going to begin the work of repair. We are going to find more partners to help us dismantle this engine of anti-Semitism. Because Jews, like people everywhere, have the right to do much more than survive. We have the right to thrive. I have dedicated my life to serving the Jewish community, to Jewish practice, to Jewish values, because I know that this community, that our values, our spiritual practice, make life better for anyone who chooses to embrace it. And if you're here, I think you know this too. The world is a better place because of Judaism, and Judaism is a better religion because of congregations like B'nai Keshet. We need our allies to fight anti-Semitism, but our allies also need us. Because Jews know something about what it means to survive, and because Jews have placed the commandment to protect the stranger, which is repeated more than any other commandment in the Torah, at the center of our practice, Jews have built a religion of liberation from all pharaohs. Jews know that the Torah teaches us again and again and again, be kind to the poor, be kind to the widow, be kind to the fatherless, or in other words, all of those with the very least power in our society. Jews also know what it means to be loved and to be cared for by outsiders. Jews embrace the commandment not only to love our neighbor, but to love all those who seem foreign and all those who are treated as peripheral. And Jews have learned to build and to rebuild our people, to imagine and reimagine our religion again and again and again. And you know what else? Jews are really good at disagreeing with each other. And Jews know, we know what it means to live in diverse communities because there are so many kinds of diversities in our community. Jews believe that God left the world a little broken so that we could all help repair it. Jews believe that every human being is created in the divine image, that every human soul is pure, is perfect. Jews believe the world was founded in love and that it will be sustained in love. And Jews know something about replacing last year's curses with this year's blessings. Tichle Hashana v'kilotecha. May this last year and its curses end. Tachel Shana uvirchotecha. May this coming year and its blessings begin. Gamar Chatima Tova.